All right. Hello, everybody. I know you're there, but I always wait a second just I see people. I see Adria and Simone, so I'm going to get started. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Healthy Living Live. My guest today is my favorite person, Dr. Doug Lisle. He is the co-author of this amazing book called The Pleasure Trap. He's the founder of the website, esteemdynamics.com. He is the psychologist at both the True North Health Center and the McDougall Program, both located in Santa Rosa, California. And he is the star of the weekly podcast, Beat Your Genes, now over 100 episodes on iTunes. You can also listen to it live every Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Pacific time on Blog Talk Radio. You can even call in. So please welcome Dr. Doug Lisle.
Hey, how you doing, AJ?
Good, the smartest person I know. So Dr. Lisle wanted to, if you think he's smart, share this broadcast right now with all your people. Dr. Lisle wanted to talk about Esteem today, and his website, no coincidence, is esteemdynamics.org. So since that's one of your favorite subjects, why don't you start out, Dr. Lisle, by telling us what exactly is self-esteem and why is it so important?
Yes, I keep grinding through this because I think I'm still trying to come up with terminology. I've come across things in the world where, somebody knows how something really is and what it's supposed to be called, but everybody else calls it something else. Like people will call people a realtor. And there is no such thing as a realtor. It's a realtor. All right. So, but if you're in that business, it'll drive you crazy because everybody just gets sloppy and says realtor. And that's just how it is. It's a disaster. And so the same thing is true for me in the realm of self-esteem or esteem. Because people will call things self-esteem, which I actually do not call self-esteem. So self-esteem to me is a very specific experience, and it has very important roots. And yet there are several different concepts that are actually distinct, and there are distinct psychological processes. One of them is going to be what I call esteem. Another one's going to be what I call self-confidence. And another one is going to be what I call self-esteem. And these are all different. And so I might as well, as long as we're talking about this, I might as well just try to explain it. Okay.
Great.
So I want you to imagine the process that goes on when other people, when you do something and other people respond very positively to this. So you put out your resume for a job, and five different companies call you up and say they want to hire you. Now, well, a lot of times this will make us feel really good, and we will say this is self-esteem. Okay, so we'll say, well, that was really good for my self-esteem. We will also use another word that is very close to being an identical twin to this, which is ego. So if we put out 5 resumes and 5 companies say that they want to hire us, we tell our friends, boy, that was sure good for my ego. Or that was really good for my self-esteem. But really, I will argue that process has absolutely nothing to do with your self-esteem. It has to do with your esteem. Okay? So you have actually received real live evidence that you are valuable to other people. And that real live evidence is actually an esteem signal that you get from other people. So that's fundamentally different than self-esteem, which we're going to talk about in a second. Now, the other issue here is a concept that we're going to call self-confidence. So self-confidence, if you get very good feedback from the world, that also, it isn't just esteem that you are receiving, it is also increasing your confidence. Because if those 5 companies all wanted to hire you, then probably a 6th and a 7th company would want to hire you. So therefore, it has actually increased your belief that you have options. Okay, so this is why, for example, if you put on a new shirt and then a new blouse, and someone says, wow, that really looks good. That can increase your confidence. It's not only a positive esteem signal that the other person thinks that you're more attractive, but it is also a increase in your self-confidence. So those two things, though, are not exactly the same thing. You can be not very self-confident, but still have received a positive esteem cue, and it can feel really good, but you can still not be confident. Like someone can say, well, listen, I really love your resume. We don't have room for you, but we really think that your resume is great. And that can feel good that you got some positive esteem, but really not necessarily influence your self-confidence that much. So self-confidence is your perceived probability of success. So this is what this is. It is obviously, it's going to be very much interrelated to what your esteem signals have been from other people. So your self-confidence and your esteem history are very close together, but they are not the same thing. And the reason is that two people, for example, can have a very similar esteem history, but they are genetically different. And so one of them is just naturally much more optimistic, and they might be quite a bit more confident than the other person, who, quite frankly, has just as good a feedback and has been signaled as just as valuable, but they just don't feel it. They're naturally more tentative in their assessments of their own abilities. So you can see this, for example, I guess an example that comes from sports. There are basketball players that are extremely confident that they can hit the next shot, but they just give them the ball. They don't have any problem. If they miss 6 in a row, doesn't make any difference. They've got confidence that the 7th one is going to go in, and they want the shot. Whereas you have other players that are much more tentative, and that until they hit a couple of shots, they don't feel confident or deserving that they should take another shot. So this is when you are coaching basketball, this is a very important thing to be understanding, that the personalities of these people are different, even though their abilities may be very similar. Okay, so this is a difference between esteem history, the actual esteem that we get from other people, and how much confidence we have. Those two things can be very different depending upon the personality of the individual. Now, neither of these things also has anything to do with self-esteem. So now we're going to be talking about a different experience that seems like it's extremely related to both of these things. And there is some relationship that we're going to observe, but it's actually a different phenomenon. And self-esteem is actually the most important personal investigation of my career, is the understanding of self-esteem, why it even exists. Because it's a very, in the animal kingdom has confidence. So animals differ in how confident they are, and they differ genetically in how bold they are. And also their feedback from experience influences their likelihood to put out energy to try to attack a problem, i.e. their confidence. Okay, we can see this all the way down to crickets. So we can actually make experiments where we set it up that a cricket wins a couple of fights with another cricket, and then we can set it up with another cricket that is, say, a little bit bigger or stronger. And if you have won a couple of fights, you are willing to fight longer with a cricket that's going to beat you than you did if you just lost 2 fights. So in other words, even at the level of a cricket, your history in that area has an influence on your confidence. Okay, so these things are natural processes that take place in animals, and also animals have individual variation in how much natural confidence they have. Now, incidentally, my good friend Alan Goldhammer has a great deal of natural confidence. It's been really entertaining since, or annoying since the time we were 8 years old watching this. Okay, so and it's one of the most entertaining things I've ever seen is to watch his son Gar grow up, who Gar also has a lot of natural confidence. And so to watch Gar be very confident about things that he had no business being confident about was just an uproariously joyous thing for me to watch. And to sort of watch Alan's genes operate in a new body, and with the understanding of a 40-year-old psychologist looking at this young kid, watching him develop, sort of almost watching my own childhood observations replay, 40 years later. So I always thought Alan seemed a little too confident. And that's also on the other side of this, is that I'm naturally more tentative. So I naturally have less confidence. It doesn't mean that I'm depressed or anything. It just means that we naturally have a somewhat different view, even based on very similar feedback histories. Okay, so that is just genetic variation. Now, each of us can become more confident depending upon what the string of success is, and what the esteem cues are. Of course, that will change your confidence levels, but your confidence level is an interaction between what the feedback is and also your natural psychology. Now, neither of these, neither the esteem feedback and the feelings that you get from that, or the confidence level that you feel, these things are not related to self-esteem, which is going to be a different phenomenon. So let's look at what self-esteem is, and let me explain why I believe that it's a core issue to be actually cognizant of, and a process to understand very, very carefully, particularly when we're talking about weight loss. I don't know that there's a more important thing to understand in the game of weight loss today than self-esteem. So let me map this out. What you have, you have a feeling that you get when you get positive feedback from other people. That feedback, when they say, hey, they think you look attractive, or they think you're smart, or they would like to hire you, or they want to be your friend. These are what I'm going to call esteem signals. And inside your mind, what you have is a device that we're going to call an esteem meter. And that meter is designed by nature to be sensitive to this particular type of cue, and to give you a feedback to you that tells you what the nature of those signals are saying. So that when people give you positive signals, your esteem meter will signal to you a positive feeling. Okay, a feeling, it's happiness. It's a mood of happiness, and it's associated with confidence, but it's not the same thing. It's just, wow, I'm being accepted. This, by the way, if anybody has any interest at all in the details of this in psychology, this is very much akin to the social psychologist Mark Leary at Duke University. It's what he calls a sociometer. So if you look it up on Wikipedia, you're gonna see a thing called sociometer theory. It's a major theory in social psychology, and it has superb data that supports it. So I actually call it an esteem meter for reasons that we're going to get to in a minute. I distinguish this. I'm basically renaming Mark Leary's sociometer with a very important purpose in mind why I'm renaming it. So Leary is basically saying how you feel is very much dependent upon the feedback you get from other people. You get positive feedback, and your sociometer causes you to feel happy. If you get negative feedback, your sociometer causes you to feel depressed, i.e. you've been rejected. And so he basically leaves it there. And I'm going to now argue that there's a very different component to the way the sociometer works that he had overlooked. And no problem. I mean, he's thought a lot about this, and we've all got sort of different angles on this. But I actually believe that this was a segment of sociometer theory that was neglected, and I think it's important. So I will argue that human beings have another device in their head. And that device is going to be what I call an internal audience. And so the internal audience is actually watching you just like other people would be watching you. So it's a virtual audience, and it's actually neural tissue that exists inside the human mind that develops a model of the world that has other people in it that effectively are observing you. So you know what this looks like if you've got people coming over for Thanksgiving and you're shining up your house and you're putting flowers out and you're looking at your apartment or your house and you are looking at it through the eyes of other people. So you are imagining what they are seeing when you are seeing it. And when it looks good to you, you are imagining that they are looking at it and that they are giving you positive feedback and they're saying, wow, AJ, this looks beautiful. Okay. And so you have this positive feeling, but the positive feeling is coming from your esteem meter. And yet there aren't any other people around. So how could this be possible that we could be feeling esteem when there's nobody around? And the answer is because we've got mythical people in our head that are giving us the positive feedback. Okay. Now I will submit that I don't believe there's any other creature on earth that has this device. I believe that this is a totally unique device of human beings. And what this device is an internal audience. And so this internal audience is gone by many names throughout history. It's been called consciousness and self-consciousness, and in cognitive therapy, they call it the internal critic, which is very interesting that they call it this. And I think that I think that is technically accurate. In other words, critics are not necessarily critical. They are an audience. So a critic could have a very positive review of a movie. But I don't believe that that's what the cognitive therapists are actually thinking. I think they're thinking that this pesky thing inside of us is a critic. And I believe that the reason why they termed it the internal critic is because when you're a cognitive therapist and you're talking to depressed people, the internal audience happens to be giving a lot of negative feedback to the individual. Okay, so cognitive therapy and its derivatives have actually had the notion that the internal critic is actually a pest, that it's actually something to somehow, it's some mythical thing inside the head that's a pain in the neck and it's a nag and it lowers our self-esteem and that it's just a problem and it's self-defeating and a mess. And I will argue that it's nothing of those things. I will argue that what's actually transpiring there is that the internal audience is giving the esteem meter signals that are its honest assessment of what the person's efforts have been. And so in the same way that you actually have a performance with real live people at Thanksgiving, when they actually come and they give you feedback, if they give you very positive feedback, then your esteem meter feels good. Okay. And that will influence your confidence for next Thanksgiving or the next get together. So we've got your self-confidence over there. That's somewhat a result of the feedback. We have a feeling that goes on in the moment about how good it feels to get either positive feedback or how bad it feels to get negative feedback. That's our esteem meter. And then we have something else. And that something else is an internal audience who is observing our efforts and giving us feedback as if real people are watching. And the reason why human beings have an internal audience is they rehearse their performances. So before you ever invite people over for Thanksgiving, you rehearse your performance in advance. You get the whole place set up. You might even try cooking some dishes ahead of time if you're really conscientious about it and it's a really big deal and you're some young lady and you're trying to impress your would-be in-laws and your boyfriend or your fiance is coming over. You might actually cook the whole dinner, 3 days in advance just to check and make sure that you've got it right. Okay. So your internal audience will watch your performance as you are making efforts, and it will give you feedback as to what it thinks of that performance. That is what I call self-esteem. That is the only thing that I call self-esteem. You have a feeling that comes about when you are making efforts or you are putting effort into performances, that your internal audience watches your efforts and it gives you feedback on those efforts. And then the feedback it gives you is to the esteem meter, because it's as if it's real people watching a real performance as opposed to an internal audience watching a rehearsal. Okay. So the internal audience gives you feedback and you get the same type of feelings that you get when real people watch your real performance. And now, why would we have this? Because it's important to make great performances. We're competing for mates, we're competing for friends, we're competing in business. You don't think that Steve Jobs rehearsed his performances before he came out there and showed a new product? Of course he rehearsed his performances, okay? AJ's been in show business. She knows the phrase, will it play in Peoria? Before they take a new show to Broadway, they would take it to Peoria, Illinois, which they consider the heartland of America, and they would play it in Peoria to see what down-home folks in the United States would think of a show. And if they didn't like it in Peoria, they knew the show was in trouble and they needed to go back to the drawing board and change some things. That's how they did it, okay? Your brain has a Peoria in it. It's called your internal audience. And that audience is watching your performances and it's giving you feedback on your performances before you take it out on the road in front of real live people. Human beings that don't have an internal audience that can do this make horrendous mistakes. We're going to call that Asperger's. So if you don't know that other people are watching and that they're reacting to you, then you're going to make mistakes all over the place. Asperger's kids don't rehearse whether or not, how to ask out a girl to the prom, probably. They just blurt it out in the middle of history class, and it doesn't go very well. The rest of us plot for weeks and weeks. That's what we do. We plot every little word and try to get it just right and just for the right moment. That's happening because there's a tremendous amount of rehearsals that are going on. Now we see we're getting a little closer to understanding how your mind actually works. The real show is when we're in front of real live people, and real live people give us real live feedback, because those are people that are either going to date us or be our friends or hire us. So that's where the real rubber is hitting the road in terms of the real action in life is taking place right there at the level of real live performances. It doesn't really count how many 3-pointers you make in practice. What counts is how did you do in the NBA Finals? That's what really counts. That's where everybody's really watching, and that's where they either give you a trophy or they call you a GOAT and they trade you to the Clippers. Okay? So this is how this works. Now, so as a result, the most intense feelings that human beings ever have are in front of real audiences. Those are the most intense moments, because that's where the real, this is what I'm going to call evolutionary currency, mates, friends, and trading partners. That's where the real currency in life is traded. Okay, it's not traded in the virtual world of imagining whether Betty Sue is going to go out with you. The real issue is, will she really go out with you when you ask? So you would expect that the most intense feelings are actually when the real live action takes place. And so you would expect that when people set their goals, when they're trying to actually accomplish things in life, their imaginations are always centered on the events that will actually take place with real live people. They're not saying, gee, I hope I land a triple axel in practice. They're saying, I hope I land a triple axel in the Olympic final. Okay, that's what they're dreaming about. They're dreaming and thinking and scheming and hoping for it to go well in the Olympic final. They are not thinking about doing it in practice. Now, when people think about weight loss, they are absolutely imagining what it's going to be like when they get esteem signals from other people about that, how much better they look and how much better shape they're in. That's what their goal is set for. Their goal is always aiming for esteem signals, because esteem signals is where human beings live. Now, this is why I call my website and my new book and everything else I'm going to do probably for the rest of my life is what I call Esteem Dynamics. What I'm interested in is esteem signals. And I'm interested in the feelings that result from esteem processes. And I'm particularly interested in how they change, or the dynamics of esteem. I'm very interested when things change for the worse. That's when you're depressed, demoralized, lose your self-confidence, and are in misery. That's bad, okay? What we're trying to do is we're trying to look at that and say, why does that happen, okay? And how can we change it? Now, I can't help myself just because I'm obsessive, that I have to criticize so much of my field. My field doesn't tend to think that esteem processes are dynamic. They have a very strong tendency to think that they are fixed, okay? So they believe that your self-confidence, your self-esteem, essentially, they actually kind of believe that this all takes place in childhood, and that your self-esteem is pretty well fixed in childhood, depending upon the reinforcement or punishment or feedback that you got from other people or your parents or from your uncle or your aunt or from Betty Sue or whatever, that it was all fixed then. And what I'm going to submit to you is that that doesn't make any sense at all biologically, and it doesn't make any sense clinically, and it's actually fundamentally wrong, okay? That esteem processes by their very nature are dynamic, okay? They have to be, just as all feelings are dynamic. So you may be very hungry right now, but if you eat for the next 45 minutes, then you're full. So that feeling is dynamic. You may be freezing cold because you're out and watching this thing from your cell phone, getting locked out of your house in Anchorage right now, but then your girlfriend comes home and opens up the door and you can go in, and then you're now by the fireplace and watching this, and now your feelings about being cold have changed. They're dynamic, okay? Your feelings of confidence can change very quickly. That's why the coach has to be careful and understand his people, because the truth is, if one of them loses, misses 2 or 3 shots in a row, then his confidence goes down. His confidence is dynamic. And then when he makes a couple, he's feeling more confident. In other words, these processes are highly dynamic. Now, they actually can have arcs where your amount of confidence in a given domain can be very similar from day to day for good reasons. And a lot of these feelings can be highly repetitive. So what we want to do is we want to take a situation where things are in a negative state, and we need to try to figure out how to shift them into a positive state. So that's what I'm really interested in. And the thing that I see most is in this arena, and incidentally, the weight and weight loss arena, you might think, well, gee, what a pesky little part of life. The truth is, this is an enormously big part of life. This is this winds up being the #1 personal goal of people in the United States. So this is no joke. I mean, people got a lot of goals. They want to do better financially. They want to fall in love, and they want to look better and feel better about themselves. But the truth is that weight and weight loss and fitness, these are essentially how it is that you look with respect to your body form. This is the #1 personal obsession in the United States. Okay, why? Well, because people are having trouble with it. It didn't used to be the #1 personal obsession of people in the world, but it is now because of the pleasure trap and the ubiquitous nature of the rich foods in the environment and the instincts that draw people to eat those foods, inexorable instincts that are constantly pushing us. as well as a toxic food environment that puts this stuff all around you. And it takes remarkable self-discipline and commitment not to fall into that trap. Almost everybody is in that trap. And then depending upon your genetics, you either wear an extra 10 pounds on you, or you wear an extra 200 pounds on you. And if you happen to be unlucky enough to wear an extra 50 or 100 pounds on you, the pounding that this does to your esteem processes is brutal. Okay? You get a lot of negative esteem signals from other people, and your esteem meter puts up with a lot of negative feedback. And it's basically like being rejected for jobs over and over again. Those jobs being either friends or promotions or romance processes. In other words, little kids don't even think that you're as valuable as the lady who's thinner. Okay, so they don't even know you. They just sort of think that way. And so the bottom line is that this is actually a very, very big deal. So even though I'm using it as an example of how esteem processes work, the truth is that this example by itself is one of the major issues with respect to esteem process that have to do with the nature of life. Okay, now, so let's look at this. You are designed by nature to seek esteem. You are not designed to seek self-esteem. You are designed to seek esteem. And if we look inside of you, you are not out to impress your internal audience. You are out to impress real live audiences. So when you start thinking about what your goals are for weight loss, you are thinking about the time when you are going to be 40 pounds lighter and you're going to fit into a really cool pantsuit, and what other people are going to think of you when that happens. And then you're going to feel good. And you're going to say, well, that'll be good for my self-esteem. And I'll tell you, self-esteem's got nothing to do with it. You are wanting esteem to increase, not self-esteem. I'm like a realtor here now. I got to get the language right. It's realtor, not realtor. And it's esteem, not self-esteem. Okay? People are focused on esteem, as they should be, but they are missing an unbelievably important lesson and an important step in the chain here that is actually the most critical step in this entire process, and that is self-esteem. Okay? So let's look at what self-esteem is and why I am obsessed with self-esteem. Self-esteem has to do with your internal audience. And your internal audience is watching your rehearsals. They're not even hardly aware of your performances, because we don't give a damn about what our internal audience is thinking about our performances when we're in front of a bunch of people that count. We care about what those people think. We're designed by nature to care about what those people think. We don't really care. We're not paying attention to this little bit of neural tissue in there that is our internal audience. We don't care less. Okay? It is being overwhelmed by the most important audience, which is Peggy Sue. Do we really care about how we're choking out the offer for the prom date, or do we care about whether Peggy Sue says yes or no? The answer is we care about what Peggy Sue says yes or no. If we did a lousy job at spitting it out and she said, yes, I'd love to go, we are elated. Okay? If we did a magnificent job of spitting it out and she says no, we're depressed. So the real live action from other people is what dominates your feeling. We are not focused on self-esteem when esteem feedback is front and center. But folks, most of the battles of life and how well we do out there in esteem processes are determined by how well we did our homework. Okay? What counts is, did we do the homework well? We are elated when we take the history final and we get the feedback that we got an A. That's great. That's really important. But the truth is that the only way we got there was by doing our homework. That's what happened. Now, you can imagine that if someone, think about this sort of interesting situation where someone doesn't study and they just do a cursory job for this very important test, and then they go take the test and they manage to get an A. It's like, what a break. It was lucky. It's cool. Are we happy? Yes, we got good esteem feedback, but that whole thing was skating on ice and it was dangerous. If we instead had studied very, very diligently and we'd gone in and taken that test and done poorly, we are depressed about the fact that we did not get good feedback. But our self-esteem says you did everything you could. Our self-esteem is watching this whole process and it's saying, you did well. You did what you could. It's a bummer that we got bad feedback and it's not pleasant. Okay. And it may lower our confidence because we may say, wow, we tried really hard and we really, we worked as well as we could, but we didn't do very well in this domain. We may not be able to hack this class. Okay? We may not be able to hack this university. It's maybe too hard for us. So it can be depressing and it can be demoralizing to get to work very hard and not get good feedback. But your self-esteem, strangely enough, is intact as long as you worked hard and diligently. Now, of course, I'm using extreme examples because most of the time, if we work hard and diligently, what happens? We get better. We get better. Okay? We can see that our performances are getting better. We can see that our three-point shooting is getting better. We can see that we've lost 7 pounds in the last month. We can see it. In fact, you can see it before anybody else can see it. The whole point of rehearsals is the fact that nobody else is watching and we can improve when nobody's scrutinizing us. That we're actually working at our performances to be displayed later, not now. Human beings, in order to develop the psychology that would have them actually working diligently at complex goals, long-term goals, they needed an incentive device to get them to do it. And the incentive device was the self-esteem mechanism. Self-esteem is the process of your internal audience giving feedback to your esteem meter on your rehearsals. When you steam up your vegetables and eat a salad and eat a baked potato, when you do that and then you go to the gym and you work out for 20 minutes or half an hour and then you come home and then you get back to the work at your desk or whatever it is, or feed the kids, etc. When you do your job, your internal audience is watching you. And when you do the job well, the internal audience says, well done. That was a good practice today. You did a good practice. Okay. And you know what? We're getting ready for the summer performance. So you get ready. Some person said, beach bodies are made in the winter. That's when they're made. Okay, summer bodies are made in the winter. That's when it's taking place. And so when you are doing your job in the winter, unless you are a kind of creature that had some way to incentivize that situation, a dream won't do it. Like, gee, one day I'd like to make a movie like Sylvester Stallone. Well, that isn't going to do it. You have to actually find satisfaction in the micro processes of the efforts that you put in every day. If you don't find satisfaction in those processes, you will never make a movie like that. It's never going to happen. Okay. If you don't find satisfaction in doing your diet well and exercising routinely, if you don't find satisfaction in it, you're not going to get there. Okay. You need to actually watch for something very, very important. The self-esteems of people that are struggling with their weight and are doing a mediocre job are terrible. And if they go to their cognitive therapist and they say, what can I do about this? The therapist will say, well, talk back to your internal critic. What's your internal critic telling you? Well, my internal critic says that I'm fat and I'm lazy and I'm undisciplined and I'm a flake. And I'm never going to do this and I just can't get it together. And I listen to that and I say, listen to what it's telling you. Okay, listen to what it's telling you. It's telling you, it's giving you criticism. It's telling you, you know what? I'm not impressed by your efforts. Now, that person also imagines what it would be like if they had it all together, and they imagines what it would be like to get the esteem from other people, to having achieved the straight A's or having achieved the triple axel or having achieved the 50-pound weight loss. They can imagine this, and they feel momentary inspiration because they would love to have it. But the truth of the matter is they also have a lot of this negative talk that's going on, and they think the negative talk is the cause of them not doing it, and they're wrong. The negative talk will change very quickly. Self-esteem is dynamic. It doesn't matter how many people gave you negative feedback throughout the course of your life. It makes no difference. The truth of the matter is, if you chop the vegetables, steam the vegetables, cut up the apples, eat the baked potato, go and exercise, if you do that today, what will happen is your internal audience will say, interesting. Okay, I'm not impressed, but you did a little something. If you do it the next day, and 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 you do it the next day, by the time you do this 10 or 12 days in a row, the internal audience is going to start saying, I'm starting to be impressed. Starting to be impressed. If you announce to the public that you're going to go on a diet, and you in front of them sat down and ate a salad and a baked potato the first day, you know what they would think? Not impressed. You're 50 pounds overweight. I've heard this before. I've heard about every diet you've gone on. I am not impressed. So yourself and your internal audience is not impressed either. And it will not give you positive feedback to your esteem meter because it's not impressed yet. But what if every single meal for the next 2 weeks you sat down in front of your village and you did a perfect job, and they knew that you weren't sneaking out and getting any crackers or cookies on the side? They knew it for a fact because there weren't any. Your internal audience knows whether or not you got any crackers or cookies on the side because it's watching you. It's watching you 24/7. So if you do that, it will have the same reaction to what the group would have if the group watched you for 2 weeks do everything perfect. And if the group watched you do everything perfect for 2 weeks, the group would say, wow, you're taking this seriously, aren't you? What do you know? I'm curiously optimistic. This is definitely a change. And that is precisely what the internal audience will signal to your esteem meter. It will say, hey, I'm starting to get impressed with your diligence. Okay? Now you can imagine what's going to happen in 6 weeks. What's going to happen in 6 weeks is the internal audience is going to say, holy smokes, are you disciplined? And how impressed I am with you. At the end of 6 weeks, you may have lost 12 or 13 pounds, and you may still be 48 pounds overweight instead of 60, and nobody can notice. Not a single soul out there gives you any positive feedback because they can't see any difference. But your internal audience will be giving you tremendously different feedback than it's given you in the last 10 years. And that's because the esteem signals have to be dynamic, just like everything else in nature. And so they will be giving you very positive feedback. They will be roaring on all 8 cylinders every day saying, well done, well done, well done, well done. Okay? That is a very significant component of human happiness. Now, it is quiet compared to what happens with esteem. So someone who goes and gets lap band surgery and then they drop 40 pounds in 9 weeks because they can't eat anything and they're sick, but everybody says, wow, Jody, you look so much better. They're basking in the esteem. and they have great positive feelings of tremendous relief, and now they're happy, and they can think that they can maybe date Rodney now because now they look so much better, and they always thought Rodney was cute, and their whole world are so excited about the esteem that they're getting. But folks, they skipped the most important step in the game. They didn't do anything for their self-esteem. But if you ask them, how do you feel about yourself? Oh boy, do I feel better about myself. My self-esteem is so much higher. No, their self-esteem is not any higher. If anything, it's lower. Their internal audience knows they cheated. Okay? Did they get an A in the history final? Yes, but they cheated to get the A. So as a result, it's so loud, the positive feelings are so loud coming in from the real life marketplace that it's drowning out the internal audience that is quietly saying, I'm not impressed at all. I'm not impressed at all. Well, you're a fraud. Okay, you cheated at this. I wonder if it's going to work. It's probably not going to work. What are you going to do when this starts to fall apart in a year or two? The internal audience isn't even remotely impressed that you went in and had some surgical procedure to fix this problem. Okay? It's not a good solution. I have compassion for the fact that people reach for that solution because they are so desperate to get esteem. They're designed to get esteem. They're designed to scheme for esteem. They want esteem. They want to be loved and accepted and valued. I have tremendous compassion for that. And I understand that human beings feel a competitive pressure to take every shortcut that they can do to get there. Every what I call get rich quick scheme. That's what those things are. 75,000 diet books have published a get rich quick scheme for esteem. Okay. Now, what we do here, what AJ coaches people to do, what we do at True North, what John McDougall does, this is a whole different game. This is the seeking of self-esteem. This is the fact that there's something to be done which is not easy to do in the face of the modern environment. It's very difficult to do. Okay. Guess what? If you muff it, there's no shortage of time to redo it because you got your whole life to do it. So if you screw it up, no worries. Okay. It's basically how long is it going to take you to learn how to walk? If you keep at it, you may never learn how to walk, and you may be in a psychological wheelchair like everybody else is, in this mess. Always just looking for an easy ramp to survive. But if instead you struggle and you learn how to walk, if you do this, then once you get on a roll here, and your self-esteem mechanism will encourage you because it will be impressed with your diligence. The spectacular excitement that I have about this is that I want people to learn to look for the changes in their self-esteem. This is what is missed, actually, in a fantastic movie like Rocky or any hero story where someone makes a phenomenal change in their life. This is the story of Oliver Twist. This is the Fagin. In other words, when people make a change, that we look at this and we recognize that it's possible. We know people can make major changes in their existence, and even people that have made major changes in their existence. One of the problems is that they forget the process that it took to get there. And once they achieve a new level of esteem in the marketplace, they are so excited about the esteem that they forget that actually the esteem is simply the result of doing a very good job at your rehearsals, getting more competitive, getting in a better position, and then earning the esteem by having done the hard work. And the problem is, if you forget about that, because you weren't paying attention to how incredible that process was to earn your own self-esteem first, then what happens is that now pretty soon life becomes about defending your esteem rather than defending your self-esteem. Okay, and we get right back to the same shortcutting that got us into trouble in the first place. This is a very easy mistake for people to get into. So sometimes people get in an incredible role, and the self-esteem mechanism aids and encourages them to do a beautiful job, and they get into a beautiful groove for a while. But then when they get the applause and they get good feedback, and then they can get lazy, and then they start shortcutting, and then they just try to hold on to the esteem, which is what they were after in the first place, and they forget that the foundation of the joy that they get from earning esteem is actually begins with self-esteem. Okay. Now, so this is why I invented my little thing called Starch Target Sheet. This is why it is that a self-esteem isn't won in a day, and it's not won with a single trophy or event. It's won with a track record of yourself watching you as you work at a problem, okay, whatever that problem is. So essentially, Nathaniel Branden, who was an early and wise thinker in self-esteem theory, with obviously by pioneers make a lot of mistakes. So he had many mistakes. So I don't want to give you his thinking as a gospel, but he was a very thoughtful man, and he had a lot of good ideas. And one of his quotes is that self-esteem is the reputation you have with yourself. That is a beautiful quote. Okay. Self-esteem is the reputation you have with yourself. Self-esteem is the reputation that you feel from your internal audience as it watches you diligently take action. The self-esteem mechanism does not require you to be brilliant, and it does not require you to be beautiful and sexy and super successful. It actually doesn't require that. You may need those things to get positive feedback from people that you're excited about being positive feedback for. You may want to be a world champion ice skater, and that's really what you want, and you feel like you might be able to do it, and you are hoping that that's true. But your self-esteem mechanism does not require that you do that. And in fact, the self-esteem mechanism doesn't even care. The self-esteem mechanism cares about, did you work diligently at the problem? That's what it's looking for. And if it turns out that you cannot be the world champion because there's somebody better, the self-esteem mechanism will not care. The esteem meter will care, because the esteem meter will wants to get the adulation and flowers thrown at you. But the self-esteem mechanism simply cares about, did you do an excellent job of actualizing your potential? Did you put in the work? Okay. If you put in the work and you do it diligently and you work hard and steadily, but not perfectly, just excellent. If you do that, your self-esteem will rise and it will maintain high throughout the length of your life. Okay. When you get indulgent, you take a break from all this and you start to be turned into a flake. It can be enjoyable to be a flake for a while, but it turns out that your self-esteem mechanism will start to signal to you, and it will start to say, I'm not very impressed with you. You're starting to be a flake. Okay. And it won't give you good positive feedback in that arena. I mean, you may like it to sit down with a box of tofutti cuties, you know what I'm saying, in a smoothie, and be like, okay, well, I'm just enjoying myself now, and the hell with it. But your self-esteem mechanism will notice, and it will say, this is mediocre. Okay. And that's what I'm going to give you. And this quiet voice will give you mediocre feedback. And that's how it works. And if you want the feeling of the self-esteem mechanism saying, well done, then you have to do it well. Okay. You don't have to be brilliant. You don't have to be beautiful. You don't have to be super successful. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be anything. To get self-esteem, what you have to do is you have to have reasonable goals that you're aiming for to earn esteem from other people, you know, to be looking better, to be healthier, to be more competent at your work, to be, you know, a better human being in some way, whatever it is. Okay. You are seeking esteem to be valuable to the village and valuable to others. But the process that we do to get there is all about whether or not our internal audience observes our efforts and believes that our efforts are appropriate and reasonable and good. Okay. Once you find out that this is the self-esteem is essentially the wind at our back with respect to every goal process in your life. And once you find out that the self-esteem mechanism yields, no matter how awful you feel about yourself now in any domain, doesn't matter how big or gaping the hole is, that your self-esteem mechanism will start to change in a matter of hours as you start to put in the right efforts. Okay? Once you discover that is the magic key to changing people from being depressed and miserable and hopeless to being optimistic and excited and looking forward to the next day. Okay? Understanding that self-esteem mechanism will change, and you do not have to win. You don't have to be a star. Nobody has to think that you're great. Nothing has to happen. The only thing that has to happen is your internal audience has to see that you put in a hell of a good effort. That's the only thing that has to happen. So you don't have to be a superstar in any way. You just have to have actualized your own potential. This was suspected, by the way, 50 years ago by a pioneer in humanistic psychology by the name of Abraham Maslow. And so some of you are aware of Maslow's work. You've heard about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've heard about self-actualization. These are all terms that Abe Maslow made famous. And once again, as a pioneer, he was confused in a number of areas about his thinking. But he suspected, he saw something in some people that he was very curious about, and now I'm putting my finger and describing exactly what it is. He saw that there were people that they didn't have to be beautiful and that they weren't rich or they weren't fancy or anything else. He called them self-actualized. And he wasn't sure even what he meant by that. But what it was that he was watching people that were relatively impervious to the feedback they got from others. Not completely, but relatively impervious, because they were marching to the beat of their own internal drummer. That essentially, like, they were people that they thought, no, this is the right way to do things, and this is the way I'm going to do them. And if other people were rejecting of them or thinking that they were silly, they were like, that's okay, I can live with that. I can't live with my internal audience thinking that don't have the guts to do the right thing. That's what Maslow was observing. And he observed that these people had a stability to their happiness that was remarkable, because it wasn't dependent on feedback from other people and the extent of their victories or losses. It was dependent upon what their own internal audience thought of their efforts. Okay. So this is, obviously part of this is natural personality, that some people are like Alan Goldhammer, by the way, I'll just bring him up as an example, is very much this way. He's very, he cares about what other people think, but he doesn't care that much. And he cares more about what he thinks about whether he's doing a good job. And so this is no act. He is not, these people don't live on a higher plane where they don't care what other people think. We all care about what other people think, unless we've got a mental disorder. Okay? We all do. Of course, that's where the rubber hits the road. But there are some people that by some method, they wind up being more sensitive, and it's more important to them about what their internal audience thinks of them. Okay? You will see this in holy people. Okay? And you will see this in people both humble and sweet and morally beautiful. And you will see this also in greatness. Okay, you'll see it all over the board. So it's not related to achievement. It's related to an internal integrity that says, you know what? I need to do a good job, because when I do a good job, I feel good about myself. That's self-esteem. And the pleasure trap is probably the most devastating attack on self-esteem that I can imagine. That that a person wants to have esteem, they want to look better, they want to be more competitive in all these domains of life. They want to be more attractive as a friend because they're not 50 pounds overweight. They want to be more attractive as a mate because they're not 50 pounds overweight. They want to be more attractive in business because they're not 50 pounds overweight. There's a heck of a lot of reasons to want to try to be fit, having everything to do with feedback from other people. Okay? So, of course, that's a huge goal for people. But what we want to do is get ourselves, push ourselves away from the fact that that goal is important and worthy, and instead focus on, okay, we've got this monster called the pleasure trap. And it is the reason why I'm 50 pounds overweight. Okay. It is not my conflicts with my mother, because if we put animals and we put them in tremendous conflict with each other, or we look at human beings around the world that have great conflicts with their parents, they're not overweight. The reason why people are overweight is an interaction of the genetics that they have and the pleasure trap that is everywhere. Okay.
Amen.
And the pleasure trap is not supposed to be something that you could solve easily, that you're just supposed to learn about it and solve it. It turns out it's a problem of extraordinary challenge, that it requires diligence and planning and execution and relentless monk-like focus. Okay. And this is what it takes to move our way out of the trap. And then it gets easier and easier and easier and easier. Okay. But we have to put in the work. And what we're trying to do then, when we do this, is watch for this magic process where the self-esteem starts to rise, and then put up a little red flag in your head and say, there it is. Okay. There it is. That's the closest thing there is to a magic key in psychology. Okay. It's a quiet key. It's a quiet voice. You need to pay attention to it. And when you see that that's how it works, when you lose your way, we know we have to return again and again to earning the self-esteem. And it does not take a miracle to do it. What it takes is a week or two of diligent effort. All right. I think I got it all said.
Oh my, that was brilliant, Dr. Lisle.
What comes up? What comes up for you, AJ, when you listen to this? Does this mimic your own process?
Yeah, and what comes up is that I need to listen to it again, and like everybody else is saying, it's brilliant. I think you're right. The pride that comes from the effort is more than the shortcuts that people get from doing gastric bypass, or because I did shortcuts. I took fen once and it worked. Yeah. But it didn't last. So that was my type of gastric bypass. But you're right. It's the pride you feel from consistent, diligent effort that means as much or more than when people give you compliments.
Yes. Super important to learn how that works. Yeah. And once we learn how that works, we can repeat it. It doesn't matter how many times we get into trouble and we fall off and we get seduced by the pleasure trap. It's like, hey, we know where square one is. And the beauty is that your self-esteem can rise in a matter of days. Okay. It does not require you to get to the end to take a bow in front of the crowd. Literally, your self-esteem mechanism will start to give you cues that you're on the right track. There will be strong and beautiful cues that will happen in a matter of hours. Okay. And that's what I want people to be aware of. And I want them to watch for that when they earn it. Okay. All right.
All right. Well, we hope you'll come back, because I didn't want to interrupt you because you were on a roll, but lots of questions came through, and I'm going to write them down so that maybe you'll come back another time and answer them. Yes. And thank you so much, Dr. Lisle. Everyone's just saying they love you. You're brilliant. They could listen to you all day. And how do you listen to it again, guys, is I'm going to be posting this on YouTube within 24 hours, or you can listen right here, right now. So thanks all of you for watching. Thank you, Dr. Lisle, for sharing your wisdom with us. I'm Chef AJ, and I make healthy taste delicious, and Dr. Lisle makes it absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Come on.